All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Running a little behind this morning. Sorry about that. A little behind schedule, but we're on. We're here, and just real quick, we were off Facebook for a while, and it wasn't a deal where we had gotten hit by the censors, the ban hammer, or something like that. It was a coding issue on the back end that we just weren't getting out to Facebook for a while. We're back on Facebook. We don't have a lot of viewership there, but so I'm just saying, if you happen to be on Facebook and see the show pop up there, do me a favor and share it. The the objective is to get everybody over to Rumble. We want to get away from Facebook, from YouTube, uh, and to a lesser extent, even from X, because X is great. Elon has done a lot of God's work on getting X more into the free speech space, but they still have policies against dead naming and all kind of bizarre pro tranny crap. So uh, you know, get over to Rumble, get signed up, and you know, on mornings where we hit certain viewership thresholds, I'll give away free memberships. I know that a lot of you have already won free memberships watching that way. Tell your friends, hey, go watch Lowry on X, go watch the Brushfire Mind, or I'm not on X. I'm sorry. Go watch Brushfire Mind on Rumble, and there's a good chance you win a free membership. In fact, the sooner you do it, the better your chance of winning a free membership, because I've given away so many that so the way it works is when I give away a free membership, it goes randomly to someone who is currently watching live, has already made a comment at the time that the free membership is given away, and is not a recent recipient of a free membership. So if a lot of you have already gotten them, then the sooner somebody gets in, the smaller the pool from available random choices are available. And RN Jesus might just smile on you. So tell your friends, come check it out. Today, I want to talk about the Trump drug prices. Uh, there's a lot that I want to talk about. I'm doing this one today because it happens to be a subject matter in which I have a lot of expertise. Okay, so quick, just so you guys understand where I'm coming from. When Obamacare was first being argued back in 08, 09, 2010, I was still active duty Army, Special Intelligence Operations, uh, and it just happened that at the peak time that this was going on, I had been stuck at a desk for a little while where I would get all my work knocked out real fast, and just basically spent a lot of time hanging out on the taxpayer dime watching Fox News. And if you recall, in that period, Glenn Beck was still had his show on Fox News, and I would catch that show every day because it came on. I think it came on at either 11 or noon local time when I was in Hawaii. So it just happened to be lunchtime, and I was always done with everything I needed to do by lunch for about a 6 month period there, where I was just stranded at this desk, and I was, oh, guys, it was awful. It was awful. I was part of a quick reaction. I was part of a quick reaction team that never got called out to react to anything. So it meant that basically for that period, I just sat there basically to be on call, to be like extra on call. It's like you're on call. Oh, cool. So I wear a pager and go out on the town, and just it's like I'm not working except if something happens. No, you sit at a desk, ready to go, just in case. And for 6 months, just in case, never came up. Anyway, so I was real keyed in on the arguments, on the court cases, on the political promises, shortcomings, and failures of the whole Obamacare plan when it was first being rolled out. And then when I got out of the Army in 2012, I'm medical retired. I'm a disabled veteran. When I got out in 2012, I opened an insurance brokerage. And for the first couple of years that I had my brokerage in place, I didn't. I opened it at like beginning of 2013. I didn't open it immediately after I got out. I waited about 5-6 months. But anyway, at that time, the big thing was when the individual mandate and the employer mandates were going into place. So I had contracts with Blue Cross Blue Shield, with I can't even think. Blue Cross, Kaiser, basically every major health insurance company you could think of. If they did health or life insurance, I had a contract with them. I had some like 50, 60 contracts to sell as an independent broker. I Incidentally, I did all lines at the time. I actually did life, health, property and casualty. I did business insurance, commercial, all that stuff. And my business model at the time is there were a bunch of companies, especially here in the conservative South. There were a lot of companies who to get wanted to get their health insurance in place so that they could grandfather their way in and not have to adhere to the employer mandate. Well, no, that's not the correct way to phrase it. Okay, so they still had to adhere to the employer mandate. The law was going to force them to purchase health insurance, but they wanted to get health insurance policies that went in force before the new Obamacare policies became the standard. So at the time, if I was hooking somebody up with health insurance, say an average family, you'd be talking about mommy and daddy and 1.5 kids, 2 kids, right? And they could get a pretty decent health insurance plan with like $1,000 deductible, which at the time was a high deductible. $1,000 deductible was high, right? The more common today, the more common deductible is like $6,500. Those weren't available. That didn't exist. You couldn't get a $6,500 deductible in 2012, 2013. Those didn't come out until Obamacare. Uh, and listen, if you have a $6,500 deductible on your health insurance, you're paying for something that is not health insurance. Anyway, so I have a great deal of expertise in that. One of the markets that I served a lot of at the time was the senior citizens market. So when you hit that certain age, you go on to Medicare, and I say that certain age because I don't actually know if it's changed recently. There was some talk about that, and I'm not clear on how those changes have gone into effect. I've been out of the business for a little while, but the in the senior market, what you have is you go on Medicare. Now you go on Medicare, but Medicare has parts. So when you turn 65, is what it was at the time, you go on Medicare, and it doesn't cover everything. So you would buy a Medicare supplemental plan, and that would cover the stuff that Medicare doesn't cover. And then quite separately, you would buy a Medicare prescription drug plan, and that would cover your prescriptions because Medicare by itself doesn't cover your prescriptions entirely, or it doesn't always have the schedule to cover all of your prescriptions, etc. At the Wheel says he needs a bingo card. Finger cracks will need to be on it. Cam says I'm on the wrong mic. And you are correct. Hopefully, making the change doesn't screw me this time, because it has been a problem before. Anyway, so what that means, now, let me bring that all around to what we're talking about with the drug industry today. In America, you pay more for prescription drugs than anywhere else in the world. That is not a function of market forces. That is a function of communism. We've talked before about the cost of higher education, about how much it costs to go to college. And the reason that the cost of going to college is so high, the primary reason is because the government got involved in funding a college education. And so all the colleges looked at it and said, well, we were charging like $4,000 a year for tuition, but now the government guarantees up to 10. So if they guarantee up to 10, then our education costs $10,000 now. And that snowballed, right? Because no one spends someone else's money as carefully as they spend their own. It really is that simple. Nobody spends someone else's money as carefully as they spend their own. So what happens with drug prices in America, essentially, nobody pays for drugs in America directly. You either have something like Medicare or Medicaid, or you have private or employer-provided insurance, or you go to a free clinic, right? Almost without exception, you don't pay for drugs out of pocket directly in America. I said almost without exception. It's hard to get drugs in America. And remember, we're talking about pharmaceutical drugs. I'm not talking about crack cocaine and a little sticky Mary. I'm talking about pharmaceutical drugs. By the wide majority, you have employer-funded, private health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So the government negotiates with drug companies on the prices that the government is willing to pay for Medicare clients. Well, now that seems counterintuitive, because I just said Medicare doesn't cover most of your prescriptions. If you want most of your drugs covered, you have to buy a supplemental Medicare prescription policy. That's correct. So insurance companies and the government negotiate with pharmaceutical companies on what they're willing to pay for the drugs. You, the end consumer, then pay for your medical insurance, and you pay your Medicare, your Medicare taxes until you get Medicare, at which point you may or may not be paying taxes into the system, depending on your retirement structure, whether or not you're a greeter at Walmart, etc. You are paying for drugs, even if you're not taking any. Right? Back to Obamacare, one of the big controversies about Obamacare is, in the interest of gender equality, men had to start paying for neonatal care, basically pregnancy. Men had to start paying for the insurance to cover the possibility of them becoming pregnant and incurring all of the additional costs that go along with a pregnancy. Obviously, that's insane. That's just absolutely ludicrous. But it is one of the things that jacked the price up. In fact, prior to Obamacare, it was often the case that what I would deal with, young couples, married, no kids yet, and they would purchase health insurance with explicit exclusions. We don't want to pay for maternity coverage for either of us, right? And we're talking about a normal married couple, boy and girl, right? It would not be reasonable to assume that they are not engaging in the activity that runs them the risk of a maternity claim. But many of them were choosing to think ahead, plan ahead, right? They do their family planning. This is when we want to have a kid. And they would say, okay, cool. We're planning on having a kid in 2 years. And the projection says that at the time we want to have this kid, it's going to cost X. So we have a checking account, or we have a savings account set up separately that we're putting 10% of our income in to save up for when we decide to have a baby. So instead of paying 3 times as much for the health insurance, we're going to save $300-400 a month on our health insurance plan, and we're going to put half of that into the savings account that we're going to use when we have a baby. That's a thing you could do before Obamacare, and a lot of young couples chose to do it, and that worked for them very, very well. That's not an option anymore. Now you have to pay an extra $600 a month for your family because your son might get pregnant. And that's a little bit of a tangent, but it's still on point, because what I'm talking about is, Pitt Danny asks, "Can you plan your trans surgery too?" Without getting into the politics of whether or not there's such a thing as trans. Yes, if you're willing to pay cash, pay out of pocket, then you can plan that. You cannot, however, legally plan on paying cash for a pregnancy unless, no, there is no unless, because you have to have health insurance. You're required to have health insurance. The individual mandate was repealed in theory, but in theory. So pharmaceutical companies negotiate with people who are spending somebody else's money, and they can set the price wherever they want to. America is the absolute last word on medical research, innovation. The drugs are made. Well, okay, I almost said the drugs are made here. That's not correct. The drugs are made in China. The drugs are invented here, and then the Chinese steal our intellectual property, and then we have them manufactured there and brought back over here. We need to see pharmaceutical manufacturing return to the United States in a big way, because let me remind you, one of the big problems, one of the big, like, freak out, hair on fire controversies from the pandemic was the fact that all the medical equipment and all the drugs were manufactured in China. And as soon as there were supply line interruptions, we saw problems. We saw shortages. We saw price increases. We saw demand skyrocket at the same time the supply dried up. That is a national security threat, right? It's one thing to say free trade is good business and there's profit to be had there. It is quite another thing to say, whoa, we don't make anything in the U.S. anymore. So what Trump is doing here, what he has done, and he's getting a lot of criticism for, because he said he's going to reduce drug prices in the U.S. by as much as 90%. He tells this wonderful little anecdote on the stage the other day about his buddy who's fat. And let me see if I pulled a video. This might be the wrong clip. Oh shit! I'm sorry, guys. I'm. I don't know if you could even hear it. I thought I was sharing the clip with you. I'm sitting here watching the clip along. I thought I was watching along with you. Leave me a comment. Did y'all even hear the clip? I'm sorry about that. But let me pop back over to here, and I want to get the RFK Jr. speech.
Major Democratic leader for 20 years been making this promise to the American people.
I am so sorry, guys. That was my mistake. I forgot to click the button to share that clip. So here's RFK on it.
This was the fulcrum of Bernie Sanders' runs for presidency, that he was going to eliminate this discrepancy between Europe and the United States. But as it turns out, none of them were doing it. It's one of these promises that politicians make to their constituents, knowing that they'll never have to do it. And the reason they'll never have to do it is because they know that Congress is controlled in so many ways by the pharmaceutical industry. There's at least one.
Pitt Denny says, what? Guys, I think I'm having some technical difficulty here. Is it not letting me? There. Okay. That should clear the reverb. Okay. Sorry about that. So we just had some technical difficulties and a little hiccup where I got confused. Okay. And Pitt Danny says that was me. Gotcha. Okay. Live is hard mode. It's okay. So basically, RFK points out that this was kind of Bernie's big bailiwick, was reducing drug prices, which is funny because, of course, Trump's being attacked on all the social media by the liberals saying, "Oh, I thought this was communism. I thought price controls was communism." It's not price controls. It's not putting in price controls. All right. Remember, Kamala was talking about price controls. She actually said that the grocery stores were price gouging people. And y'all, grocery stores run on like 1% and 2% margins, right? The really, really lucky ones are running on 5%. And that's just about a no, right? And she was talking about price controls, just saying, no, you can't charge more than, you can't charge what you want. What Trump is talking about is not price controls. What Trump is talking about is negotiation, and there is an enormous difference. The executive order that he signed yesterday did not, because he doesn't have the authority, he cannot. It didn't say, hey, all the pharmaceutical companies will now reduce their prices. You will not charge more than X. Instead, what the executive order says is that RFK Jr., the head of HHS, is instructed to essentially revisit negotiations with pharmaceutical companies and tell them, hey, we will not pay more than what top developed nations are paying for pharmaceuticals. And Trump tells this anecdote. He says he's got a buddy who's a very successful, very rich person who you've probably heard of, but he won't name him because he's telling kind of a personal medical story. And the guy's a fat body, and he calls the Donald, and he says, "Hey Donald, what the fuck is up? I'm in Europe. I'm in London right now, and I just had to get my medication. I take the fat pill. I take the drug for my body weight." Right. And Trump says, "Yeah, I know it's not working," which was great. Because I mean, the Trump is funny. It's one of the reasons that is, in fact, one of the reasons I voted for the man, is because he's funny. Believe it or not. I mean, I would never vote for somebody just because they're funny, but it is a solid It's a solid happy bonus when he's already got a lot of other reasons to vote for him. But anyway, his buddy calls and he says, my drug is $88 here in London, but when I buy it in Manhattan, it's $1,300. Why is it $88 in London and it's $1,300 when I buy it in Manhattan? Oh, well, that's because we're America and we're getting screwed. Now, I mentioned and explained earlier that in a lot of ways, this is a function of socialism, communism, of the fact that nobody spends someone else's money as carefully as he spends his own. That's a big part of it. But there's another part of it. There is another important part of it, right? Canada has socialized medicine. The members of the European Union all have socialized medicine, right? Great Britain has socialized medicine. Even Russia, China, Korea. In fact, as the left loves to remind us, every country in the world has socialized medicine. We pay for that. We pay for that. We subsidize those by being the world police, taking responsibility and therewith the expense of handling national security for most of the planet, of being the top contributors to NATO, while the other member nations are not paying what they agreed to pay. And yes, by directly paying subsidies, we send foreign aid money to the Canadians, the British, etc., right? By tariffs, right? 300% tariffs on American dairy to Canada. Huge tariffs all across the world. And you hear Trump talk about trade imbalances, and I've heard some very intelligent economists make the claim that there's no such thing as a trade imbalance. You do trade with people, and that's true. Yeah, okay. I love the idea of laissez-faire capitalism, but here's the fact: it doesn't exist. As much as I would love for it to exist, as much as I would say, hey, why can't we all just get along? And Ayn Rand style, Ayn Rand was right about a lot of stuff. And the thing she was most right about is that perfect, honorable, decent, respectable, laissez-faire capitalist style community where you don't need a government and everybody deals fairly with one another, that can totally work in Galt's Gulch, in a small community that doesn't interact with the outside world. Because the larger that community gets, the more likely it is to include corrupt individuals. And the more difficult it becomes to eliminate corrupt individuals. Right? You got a Galt's Gulch situation where, a bunch of wealthy industrialists leave the rest of the civilized world and go and choose to work with one another and to purchase and trade with one another. Yeah, that works out great, especially when it's hidden from the rest of the world where nobody can see what's going on. And you get one guy that starts cheating people, and it's, we're laissez-faire capitalists with no functioning government system. And we'll hang a motherfucker if we think he robbed us. And part of what keeps everybody in line is everybody knows that if they're the one that screws the neighbors will hang them in the town square. It doesn't work globally. So outside of the United States, drugs are cheap. I mean, compared to how we understand it for our sensibilities, drugs are cheap. $88 for the same pill in London as it cost him $1,300 for the pill in Manhattan. And you'll find that is the case with all the drugs in America. We are subsidizing the cost of those drugs. See, what if it was $500 in America and $500 in London? Well, they can afford to sell it in London for $88 because somebody in America is buying 13 pills, is paying for 13 pills every time they want to buy one. So this isn't just about getting our pharmaceutical prices under control. Our entire medical industry is a hotbed of corruption and graft that needs to be overhauled. And a large part of what needs to be done to overhaul it is just to eliminate regulation. Right? Without going too far down the path of the argument against licensure, the fact is licenses exist for one reason and one reason only: to create an artificial bar to entry in order to artificially suppress supply in order to abuse demand. The theory behind licenses that they guarantee the quality of a professional, yeah, that's cute. It'd be great if things could work that way. But the fact is they do not work that way in the real world. They just don't. Licenses only serve to artificially crush supply in order to increase demand. Our licenses cause price inflation. And Sergeant Major points out, also eliminate middlemen. Yes, I would say that, we need some middlemen. The guy that's actually mixing the drugs is probably not qualified to be the guy that delivers the drugs. So there's some room for middlemen, but there are way too many middlemen, and not nearly enough actual professionals, and that is another part of the problem. So overall, I think it's a good move. I think it's one of those brilliant moves where the result is that Donald Trump has also done something that most people. This one's tough to phrase. Like I said, it's not the same as price controls, and I don't even have to argue complex semantics here, because what he's done is he said, listen, he hasn't said we're putting price controls. We're not telling the pharmaceutical company they can't sell their drugs for whatever they want to sell them for. We're telling them we won't buy them at that price. And so they either have to choose not to do business with America, with the American government, or you make us a deal. You make the deal we want to make. TPS report points something out, and this is actually something I wish I had thought about bringing in on this conversation earlier. Correct. There are only two countries where they allow advertising of drugs: the United States and New Zealand. And by totally unforeseeable coincidence, they happen to be the two countries where drugs cost the most. Can't imagine why that is. Sergeant Major points out, if drugs were made in the U.S., they could be directly shipped from the manufacturer. Hell yeah. So I think it's a good move, and it's one more check in the win column, especially since this is something where the Democrats are going to try to come out against it. They have come out against it, which is hilarious. It would be if Donald Trump came out one day and said, "Hey, I am authorizing taxpayer-funded gender-affirming surgeries for every American citizen," the left would suddenly be hardcore, there are only two genders, right? If Donald Trump came out and said, I will fund I will fund transgender surgeries for all U.S. citizens, Bernie Sanders would be marching with a sign that says God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. It really is that simple. They don't have any principled positions, right? They're just sociopathically dedicated to the opposite of Trump. Whatever Trump does, they are the opposite of that. Period. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. Y'all be safe out there. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow. Oh, there I am. Okay. Whoops. The button didn't work right. Let me try that again. Okay, see, now that's what's supposed to happen.